Some theories specifically aim to explain these kinds of demographic correlates, these specific correlates of criminal activity. Some theories specifically are intended and designed to do that kind of thing. But we can also more generally apply and consider some of the same kinds of theoretical issues that we've already talked about to understand these correlative relationships between things like gender and crime and age and crime. So it's different. We're talking about age and crime. Age and crime. What we're going to talk about today is not crime over the life. Let's talk about that. We're talking about persistence and desistance from adolescence and adulthood. But we're dealing with reality, the social reality, that most crime is committed by kids, right? Most crime is committed by adults. Why is that? Right? We actually have proposed a couple of different explanations already. The one we talk about most is self-control. We talk a lot about self-control. The idea is that adolescents are the lowest among all age groups, basically, in absolute levels of self. Their ability to delay gratification is basically at its lowest. I mean, it's not actually at its lowest. Like, again, I have a 3-year-old, and her absolute level of self-control is like in the pits, right? However, she just, because of the fact that he's 3, he's not out and doing things without being supervised. So there's like, her level of self-control is technically like way worse than that of like your average 15-year-old. But at the same time, your average 15-year-old is going to have way worse self-control, way lower self-control than your average 35-year-old. So the age crime curve, Dr. Henry said, is modeling self-control, is modeling this pathological trait. And those who are low self-control relative to their peers are going to be most involved in crime anyway. But you're going to have more crime among adolescents because of self-control themselves. Because they can't delay gratification, they find risky things. So we're trying to explain this relationship between adolescence and crime. We've talked about self-control as one potential explanation, but we want to understand what this means. We talked about the age crime curve last time. The age crime curve, as we mentioned, is this really persistent, fascinating pattern of behavior, which is that crime is most concentrated among adolescents ages 15 to 19, and then it really trails off into young adults. Again, this pattern is persistent, it's pervasive, it's ubiquitous, we see it everywhere. In fact, it's so big and so important that Godwin and Hershey and others have basically said in order to understand the phenomenon of crime, we have to understand the relationship between age and crime. Because it's so big and so robust and so clear and obvious that in order to be able to understand this thing called crime, we have to understand its relationship with age. It's so important to be able to understand this correlative crime, to understand the phenomenon of crime itself. What's kind of interesting too is that the age crime curve seems to be becoming kind of steeper. Basically, the age crime curve is becoming more peaked over time. Crime is becoming increasingly concentrated among adolescents. It's not like this relationship is getting weaker, if anything, it's getting stronger over the past several decades. It should be noted, however, that not all crimes follow the age crime. Now, this should make sense. Cheating on your taxes is not something that a lot of 15-year-olds do. So not all crimes follow the age crime curve. It is kind of sort of just an average, right? This is mostly talking about like street crime type stuff. There's some crimes like gambling and forgery and tax cheating, certain types of fraud. Those have different age crime curves. Like every offense kind of has nobody. Just my way. So every crime basically has an age crime. Every crime has an age. So most crimes, most street crimes in particular, follow that really consistent. So we talked about following the age crime curve, why some people persist and some people persist, but actually a lot of people end up persisting either by dying or just by like stopping their offending at some point in adulthood. Why does that happen? That's what we talked about last time. Today, what we're interested in is why is it crime is committed by kids in the first place? Talk about self-control as one potential example, but are there other actually? Are there other potential causes that might explain this correlation? What are the factors in between being a kid, being an adolescent, and being criminally involved? What are the sort of factors that go on in between? To address that question, we're usually asking questions related to theories that we've already talked about. So one question that's been asked quite frequently is, do adolescents have deeper social bonds than adults? That's a pretty simple question. It's something we can test empirically, certainly. Are social bonds weaker among kids than they are among adults? There's simple good reasons to expect that this might be the case. One reason this might be the case is because adults' integration, the mechanisms of social integration that are available to adults, are quite a bit stronger. Things like marriage and family that are adult experiences are just differently experienced by children if they have access to something. Well, so these mechanisms of social integration and regulation that sort of provide moral limits on people's actions are not the same for adolescents as they are for adults. We also know, in addition to marriage, that work in adulthood is really important to adult social bonding, present a kind of turning point, as we talk about. It can be this thing that can help a person sort of deal with a labeling event, negative labeling that having been convicted of felony, going to prison, whatever the case may be. It can bring them back onto a political assistance. It can help turn a person at a turning point, to help a person turn away from like a criminal career or lifestyle. So you can have that as a possibility for adults. But the prospect of marriage among adults is really important to the law is simply not available. So the extent to which adolescents are bonded to the social world is through kind of imperfect means, or at least through less perfect. You're basically talking about like connection to parents, connection to school, and a state in conformity via sort of like educational and occupational aspirations, stuff like Hermes, stuff we've already talked about. Maybe those are a little bit less effective than having a stable job. Like I have a stable job, and I married, and I have children. Like the social bonds that I experience as the same person are just so much different now at my age than they were, say, 10, 15 years ago. So the extent to which you experience social bonds is going to vary by the kinds of social bonds that are available to different based on certain behaviors. So maybe it's the case that adolescents are simply less strongly bonded to the social world than adults. They have less to lose because they're less bonded. They have a weaker state in conformity. Maybe that is simply the case. This can also work its way into how you have, I don't have time to do anything anymore, right? Because it's important to regulate anything like I can take people into account, the kids, job and all that. I don't really have time to just like screw off, right? I used to, but I don't anymore. There are mechanisms of involvement, mechanisms of how to take other people into account that produce involvement. My schedule is simply too full. I'm constantly taking the kids to ballet and swimming, and I have time to. Even if I were in line, which I'm like very well. Except skating this year, honestly. Besides those, like I just don't have because I'm so integrated based on like the social roles that are provided to me as like an adult. So those are just not available to adolescents. So adults are more involved and regulated. They have higher different types of commitment. These provide a really strong safety and conformity that again adolescents maybe just don't have access to. In the absence of these social bonds, you might have new peer groups that can sort of emerge and become this really important mechanism of like how you spend your time doing basically hanging out doing nothing. And that can be available. That can fill the void left by a low involvement. All of this can sort of happen at the same time, such that in general, perhaps it's the case that adolescence, the age crime curve, is just a product, not of self-control, but of the fact that adolescents are just less weakly or more weakly bonded to the social world than adults are. Well, I think it's a reasonable explanation. It's a reasonable possibility. Another possibility, aside from like the self-control, is strain. Talk about strain. Strain, as you understand it, relates to just general negative stuff, things that happen to you generally, right? That you don't like. The presentation of negative stimuli, the inability to get something that you want, right? All these kinds of, there's a really big broad category. Okay? They're stressful experiences that are experienced by everyone to greater or less extent. It's a variable, not everybody experiences the same kinds of strain. But what do people deal with strain differently? Or maybe you have different people who do in fact experience different kinds of strain. So the question maybe then is, do adolescents experience more strain than adults? That's what Agnew might say. Adolescents experience more strain than adults, or at least can cope with it less well, can deal with it cognitively and emotionally less well than adults can, for example. Adolescents' stressful experiences are only becoming more and more a topic of political conversation, right? It is harder to be an adolescent now than it was when I was an adolescent, not all that long ago. It is simply more difficult. Like I grew up before Facebook was a thing. I grew up before Instagram was a thing. I didn't have a phone that access to the internet until I was like a senior in high school, right? And honestly, like thank God for that. It is truly really difficult to be an adolescent in this day. There's all different kinds of exposure to stressful experience. And this is all its way into like a long discussion about adolescent happiness and mental health. I mean, this is absolutely a thing that high level people in the academy, like as it's not just our university, but across university, people are talking about. It's something that makes the front page of big newspapers. This is a huge, huge issue. And it relates to the concept of strength. It relates to the concept of what is the adolescent experience relative to the adult. Now, traditionally, there needs to be more on this, obviously, so a lot of the speakers come from like 20 years ago. But we need to do more on this as sort of things, technology, whatever develops. But we have experiences straight up all different kinds of domains and friendships and dating and bullying experiences in school. Those are hugely important. Maybe criminal coping or deviant coping generally represents a kind of way that adolescents deal with general negative stuff, how they deal in general with negative experiences. That's certainly possible, exactly what Agnew would anticipate. Maybe it's just adolescents either have different types of strain that they're exposed to, or because of an interaction with developing personality and low self-control, maybe absolute levels of self-control. They're unable or less effectively able to deal with the negative stuff. Yeah, that's possible. That's certainly possible. Um, Differentiating things and trying to understand which is most plausible. Great hackback practice. You're trying to come up with. Adolescence is also a time of increased autonomy. Increased autonomy means like a little bit of exposure to like adult social roles, a little bit of exposure to adult social roles and decreased parental supervision can be a kind of strain. It's basically exactly what Moffat are. I mentioned last time that the maturity gap between sort of what you expect and what you get, like what the social world allows for you as an adolescent in Western civilization in the 21st century, what the social world allows for you, but what you feel capable of doing, that distinction is a kind of strain. That disparity is a kind of strain. There's a gap between what you expect that you should get, what you think you're ready for, and what the social world allows you to access. That's a kind of strain. I mentioned that one. It is a kind of strain. It's basically exactly what Moffat was talking about. The maturity gap is basically a kind of strain. You want things, but you can't get them. Not just like material property kind of thing, but it's also like status, identity, reputation, power. These are things that adolescents typically don't get access to, primarily through like legitimate employment. Like